We are recording.
Great. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's meeting of CS Bars. To start us off, I ask that roll be called to establish a quorum, please.
James Efting. Della Justice.
Present.
George Leo. I think George is here, maybe just can't hear us. George Leo?
Present. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, present. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear
Sorry.
you. Kevin Marshall?
Present.
Jessica Park?
Present.
Karen Travis?
Here.
Linda Keller?
Present.
We have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Next up will be public comment, 2 minutes per comment. Those who signed up in advance, if any, will speak first if present. Those who raise their hands after that will be recognized in order. To raise your hand on a computer, you can press the raised hand and raise your hand on a phone by pressing *9. Staff will place a timer on the screen for those using a computer, although we'll switch to a verbal time alert in case of any technical difficulties, and we'll provide a time alert for those calling in today. With that, let's see if there is any public comment today.
Thank you, Dean Keller. So also just for record keeping purposes, those comments that were received in writing were distributed to the members of CS Bars, and those public comments should be sent to csbars@calbar.ca.gov. We did not have any who signed up in advance for public comment, but you need not do that. You can raise your hand here and we'll take in order those who have raised their hands. So far I see 3. The first of these is Mitchell Winnick, and I'd like to recognize Mitchell Winnick for 2 minutes.
Am I now unmuted?
Yes.
As president and dean of Monterey College of Law, I have great concern about the recent notice that a non-California representative of the federal lobbying group, Veterans Education Success, has been appointed to CS Bars. As you know, CS Bars was specifically created to advise the California Committee of Bar Examiners and the Board of Trustees of the State Bar regarding policy and regulatory issues related to California accredited law schools. The nominee appears to have a very distinguished career as Vice President for Legal Affairs for the lobbying group Veterans Education Success, and as an Assistant Attorney General in Kentucky and graduate from the University of Kentucky and ABA Law School. What is unclear is why these out-of-state non-legal education regulatory experiences and an out-of-state ABA law degree provide the type of expertise for the area of California accredited and registered law school regulations. What is clear, concerning, and on the public record is that Veterans Education Success has engaged in an aggressive public and legislative lobbying campaign at both the state and federal level against California accredited law schools. They have promulgated allegedly false and misleading statements about CALS to both the U.S. Department of Education and the California Senate Judiciary Committee. Their published opinions are in direct opposition to the public, legislative, and administrative positions of the State Bar, the California Supreme Court, and the California Legislature. Great concern that a legal representative of this group, an organization that has publicly stated that CALS are subpar law schools, fail to meet the minimum standards of a legal education, are a useless law degree, a waste of time, a waste of a large sum of money, and not even real law professors, has been appointed to CS Bars. I would welcome reassurance from the chair and the VES appointee that this is not the intended agenda for their participation of CS Bars, and in fact would be pleased to learn that the VES position has changed and that VES would be supportive of California veterans and their families and their renewed access to legal education through
Dean
enrollment
Winnick, your
in
time has
California
expired.
accredited
Thank
law
you.
schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next commenter will be Todd Hill, and we are recognizing Todd Hill.
Good morning, all. You can start the timer. My name is Todd Hill. I'm here to speak today on issues related to People's College of Law. As the majority of you are aware, but for those who are not, I have filed a case in Central District Court. And that case is number 2:23-CV-01298-JLS-PD. The case number again is 2:23-CV-01298-JLS-PD with the Honorable Judge Staten, the same judge who is reviewing the current Girardi matter. I matriculated People's College of Law in the fall of 2019. As of today, I have no current path forward for a degree that would require less than an additional 2 or 3 years of study time. This after I have completed the entirety of the course curriculum at People's College of Law. It's a 4-year offering. I did do so in 3 years, and there is a statutory requirement that the bar maintains that I must have a physical presence in a school, even though there is no course requirement for that school. A physical presence requirement without the need to study, because that somehow protects the public. I've asked CS bars for help related to this matter. To date, I'm no further. State Bar of California took control, or at least put the school on probation in December
Thank
2022.
you, Mr. Hill. Your time
October.
has concluded.
Thank you.
Next, I would like to recognize Kevin Clinton.
Hello, thank you so much for hearing me today. My name is Kevin Clinton. I graduated from People's College of Law on May 1st, 2022. On October 21st, 2023, I applied to take the California bar exam in February 2024. While registering, I noticed that the bar said my transcripts had not been verified. I called the bar for confirmation, and it was confirmed that my transcripts had not been sent to California bar after graduation. When I contacted the People's College of Law to have my transcripts sent over, the administration tried to blame the California bar for not asking for my certification. On top of this, I still have not received the certificate of my Juris Doctorate, despite all records on the People's College of Law side stating that I have graduated, and my repeated requests for it. People's College of Law continually fails to do the most basic administrative task as an educational institution. I ask that this be added to the record against PCL in its upcoming inspection. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I'm done.
Thank you, Kevin Clinton. There are no further hands raised, Dean Keller.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a reminder in terms of the role and purpose of CS Bars as an advisory committee. We do not have a direct role in terms of accreditation or in choosing public members for the committee itself. I thank everybody for their public comment. With that, I would like to move on to approval of the minutes from our previous meeting on August 16th, 2023. Is there a motion for approval of the minutes from that date? And please identify yourself for the record.
I move to approve, and this is Dean Jessica Park from Abraham Lincoln University School of Law.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a second?
I second Dean Kevin Marshall from University of Laverne.
Okay. Thank you. Teresa, can you do the roll call, please?
Sure. James Efting. Della Justice.
Abstain.
George Leo.
As well, I wasn't at the meeting.
Kevin Marshall.
Aye.
Jessica Park.
Aye.
Karen Travis.
Abstain.
Linda Keller.
Aye.
All right, we have 2 ayes and 4 abstains. I'm not sure if we can pass the minutes with this.
And Jean, we have one absentee who did attend the meeting.
Can you repeat the vote for Teresa? I'm sorry, I didn't hear the count.
Sure, we have 2 ayes, 4 abstains, and 1 absent.
Of those voting, you have a majority, so you're fine. And just for the future, folks who are absent do not necessarily have to abstain. You may rely on your compatriots who were in attendance to ensure that they were correct. So in the future, that's just another count. But because the count is 2 and no nays, you're fine, Teresa. Thank you.
Okay, the motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Moving to the chair's report, I would like to acknowledge the new members of CS Bars. As you could see from the roll call, we are joined by Dean Karen Travis of St. Francis Law School, as well as Della Justice from Veterans Education Success. I would like to thank the continuing members for their service. Dean George Leal of Irvine College of Law, Dean Kevin Marshall of the University of Laverne College of Law, and I think you have a longer title than that now. I apologize, I don't have that all in front of me. And Dean Jessica Park from Abraham Lincoln University School of Law. Our CBE member, Jim Efting, is absent today, but of course appreciate his continued service. And I'd also like to thank Dean Michael Clancy from Northwestern California University School of Law, who has just completed his term. Moving on to the rest of my report, I don't have a lot today. I did want to note a couple of things. First is that my understanding is that of the special set timing for today is that we expect to discuss the portfolio bar exam at 2:30 p.m. In addition, want to call your attention to a couple of items of interest on the CBE agenda for this Friday, October 13th. There is a special set item at 11 a.m. on modifying the first year law students examination to eliminate the essay questions, resulting in an all multiple choice exam. In addition, the CBE has an agenda item for taking action on revisions to the testing accommodation rules after that was out for public comment. Both of those can be found on the CBE agenda under Part 3 examinations. Under operations and management, there's also a recommendation to circulate rules revision for public comment regarding eligibility rules. So I just wanted to draw your attention to those items if you haven't already had a chance to review the agenda for the CBE meeting on Friday. With that, I will move to part 2 on staff reports. First, I believe we have a report on the first year law students examination.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amy Nunez. I'll be presenting on the first year law student exam, an upcoming October exam.
Amy, I think your audio isn't
connected in a way that, at least I can't hear you very well.
Okay, how about laptop? Is that helping? Did you hear that or no?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, okay, great. All right, so I think there's a PowerPoint.
Give me one moment. I will bring that up. Okay, let me just share my screen here. Let me present this. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you, Teresa. So if we can go to the next screen. So I want to talk a little about what to expect for the upcoming exam. Oops, sorry. Yes, here we go. So I would just want to remind everybody about the format of the exam and how we got here. So we embarked on remote testing prior to the pandemic. So starting with the 2019 exam, we provided the exam and administered it in a remote testing environment. At the time between October 2019 and June 2022, we used record and review with the ExamSoft software. Since that time, we transitioned over to live proctoring, starting with the October 2022 first year law student exam. And we'll be using Prometric, but will not be using live proctoring because as of October, for this upcoming exam, we've transitioned to an in-person testing while we're allowing some remote testing. So while our remote testing has proven to be successful, this is the 7th time that we'll be providing the ability to remote test. Our intent is really to have this next exam be an in-person exam. If you go to the next slide, I can explain a little more. So we've transitioned from the remote exam to in-person after a few experiences. So we've learned that some applicants have had challenges with both identifying proper testing environments, that is having an adequate space. We have a lot of people who sit for the first year law student exam that are outside of the state and are unable to take advantage of space that we offer here at the State Bar for testing. And also some applicants report experiencing challenges with consistent internet. And for that reason, we moved over and opted for an in-person exam. Also, during the October 2022 first year law student exam, the software vendor, Prometric, presented some technical issues during that time. And so we thought we would offer this option. The availability of Prometric test centers in California and other states also allowed people who not to have to travel that significantly. There are test centers spread all over California. And so what we also did in this process is understood if people still wanted to opt for remote testing. So while this is intended to be an in-person exam, people are still able to test remotely. If you can go to the next screen, please. As you can see here, we have, while the primary modality is in person, of our 214 applicants that registered for this exam, 55 will be taking that exam remotely. 158 are testing at Prometric test centers, and 1 will be testing in the Los Angeles State Bar office. So as you can see here, we have a lot of people that are taking advantage of using the Prometric test centers. Next slide, please. See, these are some upcoming dates that are very important that I would really want to highlight with your students. So the final eligibility deadline, that deadline was yesterday, October 10th. And that's the last date that people could submit their paperwork for establishing their eligibility to sit for that exam. The deadline to schedule your mock and actual exam session. So regardless of whether you are testing in person at a Prometric test center or remotely, all applicants are required to schedule a mock and the actual exam. So the mock exam is required for those that are testing remotely. The mock exam ensures that people are familiar with the process, with the system software, and it also ensures that people's laptops are compatible with the software. So those are mandatory, and they had to be scheduled. Originally, the date was October 10th. We now have an extension, so all of the schedules have to have been completed by October 14th, 2023. So let me clarify. The deadline is about scheduling. It's not about completing the mock and the actual exam. It's about scheduling them. So October 14th is the final deadline anyone can schedule their exam sessions for. And the last key deadline that I want to highlight is October 13th. That is the deadline for the emergency testing accommodations. And that's really what I wanted to highlight about the upcoming exam. But does anybody have any questions? All right, thank you so much.
Dean Park, sorry, I thought I saw you unmuting. Was that a figment of my imagination?
No, yeah, I was clicking, but yeah, I have no questions.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Amy, appreciate it. Up next, we have the report on the upcoming registrars meeting and the law school assembly.
Sorry to speak again, though. I did see George Lill had his hand raised. But it did flip off.
Well, I'm sorry to jump in at the last second. It just occurred to me, I in conversations with at least one of my students, they had some issues, just to make staff aware, getting through to the state bar. He has an issue with the distance. He lives in Ventura. The closest Prometric site is, like about an hour and a half drive. So he was trying to get some advice and get the process started to request remote learning. So once he got through, he said he was pleased with the response, but it was difficult to get through. He was on hold for the better part of, I think, 45 minutes or so, and it took a couple calls. So to the extent that as these deadlines come up, if staff was aware that you've got some very anxious and nervous applicants looking to try to confirm where they would take the exam, I think it would be helpful to them and to the schools that they attend.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you for that alert, Dean Park. Now we'll move on to report on the upcoming registrars meeting and law school assembly.
Great, thank you so much, Dean Keller. First off, my name is Cody Hunanian. I am the program director of policy data and also our Ed Standards team here. So it's great to meet everyone and be a part of this conversation. I have the great privilege of announcing and sharing with everyone here some exciting events that are coming up. And I know that CS bars and other advisory groups have been part of our kind of brainstorming around which issues are of the utmost importance to both registrars and other faculty in law schools generally. So I'm going to go in chronological order here and just share some dates and some registration information. I'll start with the registrars meeting, which is scheduled for October 19th, and it will be hosted online from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Pacific time. That will be on Zoom, and to get the link to join that event, you do have to register. So I know many of the folks who would be interested in attending have already received that registration email. So this is a reminder, definitely be sure to sign up. I know for that particular meeting or that event, I think the original deadline for registration has passed, but that is still accepting registration. So I encourage everyone to register for that event. And just to prime that conversation, there's going to be some really interesting updates on the applicant portal system. I know there's going to be a discussion about logistics for the 2024 bar exams, some reminders about our basics like the oath card, and some other topics that I'm sure will be of huge use to registrars and others. After that, on November 2nd, we have the law school assembly meeting, and that will also be from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Similarly, it has the requires registration ahead of time to receive that link to join. So definitely keep an eye out for communications about that event. I know CS BARS members were particularly involved in brainstorming and choosing some priority topics, including online education delivery, and also something that I think is really on the front and cutting edge, which is the impact of artificial intelligence to law schools and education delivery. On top of that, some really important conversations around connecting with students cross-culturally and other topics. I have been working with some of our staff on identifying experts in these fields, and I know that those conversations are going to be very helpful. So again, the registrars meeting on October 19th, law school assembly meeting on November 2nd, and both of them require Zoom registration ahead of time. So please do register as soon as possible.
All right, thank you. Does anyone have any questions on this? Okay. All right, great. Then we'll move on to the report on distribution of the 2023 annual reports. Natalie, you're still on mute.
Whoops, there we go. Okay, so I'll take that. I just want to confirm that the annual reports were distributed on the 15th of September to both unaccredited and accredited schools. The deadline is the usual traditional September 15 here in the San Francisco office. That's the time at which the reports and the payment should be received, and they will only be received by mail. They cannot be received via upload or via Ames portal at this time. So if people have individual questions, last year we did study halls, but this year we are not getting as many questions. And so we are available for questions to the law school regulation box, or alternatively to make live appointments. It is helpful to make them sooner rather than later, just because time is shorter as the deadline approaches, but we are here to help. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Natalie on this? Okay, and I think you might have said September 15th on the deadline, which I think we all know was November 15th.
No, so the distribution was on September 15th, but they are due on November 15th. Thank you.
Sure. All right. Do we have anything for recent developments today?
I was just going to talk very quickly about the fee increases.
Okay.
So we withdrew the item today because they're actually not yet posted again for public comment. The fee increases that we've talked about at the Board of Trustees meeting, at the CBE meetings, were all approved at the September Board of Trustees meeting, except for the fees related to the California accredited schools. So what's happening there is that those will go out for public comment later this month for a 30-day public comment period, specifically about the tiered approach, getting feedback on that, and looking at options of reducing the target amount for those tiered approach options. So there'll be options in this proposal for the public to weigh in on, and that will be brought to the Board of Trustees again for the January meeting. So just to let you know that later this month will be posted, and the comment period will be 30 days. So hopefully you will be able to read through the options and give your comment.
Okay, thank you for that explanation there. Appreciate it. Okay, then yes, as Audrey just mentioned, our first item under discussion was withdrawn for the reason she articulated. My understanding is that our discussion on the proposal for the portfolio bar exam will take place at 2:30. So that we can move on to discussion item C on law school performance report and discussion of future metrics and indicators. I believe this is back to Natalie.
Sure, thank you. So Teresa, could you start by showing the PowerPoint that has metrics and indicators in its title? And then we'll
Sure,
turn over
yes.
to the performance report shortly after that.
Give me 1 second.
Perfect, thank you.
Sorry, it seems like, oh, there we go. Let me just make this bigger and present.
Okay, perfect. So what I want to do is provide a little bit of context for this item here. For those of you that attended or watched the tape from the August CBE meeting, you are aware that a law school performance measurement report was presented to the CBE. This report was based on available data from the annual reports as well as some qualitative information. And as part of looking at that report, we're thinking about what's there at the moment, but also what should be there in the future. So let's go to the next slide. The current report, it's the first time that we've shown global data in a number of years to the CBE, and it comes from your annual report and qualitative feedback provided to Access and Inclusion. And some of the members here participated in some of those surveys and then also focus groups as well. And thank you to Dean Leal, who provided a report on his experience in being a part of those focus groups. It's a real help when schools can take the time to do that. Part of what the goal is here is to track the contribution of the accredited and unaccredited program to the profession, and also the performance of those programs as well. Next slide, please. So after looking at that report, the committee discussed thinking about, are there other measures or indicators that should be added? And sources to think about might be the types of measures that are tracked by institutional accreditors. So for example, WASC, Higher Learning Commission, et cetera. Most of those rely heavily upon IPEDS data, but also on additional data that they collect as well, particularly in the area of finance progression and retention. There also are measures that are tracked by the ABA, and so far we've adopted some of those in the area of demographics. Over the last 3 years, we've phased in a demographic profile that looks a little bit more like the categories that the ABA tracks to allow cross comparison. And there may be other measures that we should be looking at unique to the segments of unaccredited and accredited schools to track the performance of those programs. Next slide, please. So we'll come back to this at the end, but in a few minutes, we will just quickly review what was shared with the Committee of Bar Examiners in August. And keep in mind some of the types of metrics or measures that you think may be helpful going forward. We sent the tape cut to the members prior to this to have a chance to review what was shared at the CBE, but we'll repeat it again for the members of the public who are joining us. Think about the financial indicators that should be used, progression of students, graduation rate of students. Should we be looking more deeply at performance by modality, full versus part-time programs, and then ultimately career placement? These are some large buckets of measures where we haven't spent as much time and could spend more time in the future if it makes sense. And we particularly look to you for those special unique measures that we should be tracking in California. So let's depart from this presentation, and if we could return to the other PowerPoint that's in there, that is the law school performance report. And are there any questions before we put that up so far, even though we will circle back? Okay, so let's just proceed. Perfect. So this is the report that we shared with the committee, and I'd like to thank our Office of Research and Statistics for help in compiling this information, being able to share it with you today. Next slide, please. The background introduction page on the report just explains the sources that were used that we discussed. Let's go on to the next page. First of all, just looking at the overall number of schools as a metric or an indicator, you can see the number of schools, and we're seeing some consolidation in the group. As of 2022, that's the correct count. Since that time, 2 additional unaccredited schools have made the voluntary decision to close. A 3rd school has transferred from the accredited to the unaccredited portfolio effective January 1st, 2023. Next slide. And if you have questions during, feel free to stop me and ask as we go. Okay, looking at the teaching modality by type, we see that there is a great increase in the number of schools that are choosing the distance modality. Not a surprise given the success and the student demand that developed through the period of COVID times. Next slide. Looking at enrollment, we can see a great increase in the CALS enrollment versus a decline in the unaccredited enrollment. But part of that is also due to recharacterization of schools' choice of categories. So during that time period, we saw 2 large schools transfer from the ABA approved portfolio to the CALS portfolio. We also saw 3, including 2 very large schools, transfer from the unaccredited to the accredited portfolio. So that's also driving those numbers as well. Next slide. Here, this is a breakdown by the demographic categories, very close to what the ABA categories are. You can see on the left, the CALS in the blue, on the right, the unaccredited schools in the green. Fairly similar demographic profile, slightly higher Latino population in the CALS profile. Looking at gender identity, it is relatively recent that we've added a non-binary other category to gender identity. So for the first time, we're getting that information. And these demographics and gender identities were rolled out in a 3-year period. The gender identity, along with veteran status, was rolled out in the most recent period. And so when we started requesting the expanded demos, the first question we got was, could you please expand the gender identity? And we were happy to say that that was already in the works, and we're beginning to collect that data now. Next slide. We can go on to the next slide. I think we've come out of the slideshow. We might want to go back in.
So sorry, it turned out my mouse died in the middle of the presentation.
Oh, no.
Let me represent this.
Okay.
All right, this is not showing up correctly on my laptop, is it? Can you see? Oh, yes, you can see the whole thing. All right, let's.
Okay, I think we're at about slide 7 next, approximately.
Why is this not working?
That's working.
There we go. Sorry about that.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, so looking at the average cost to obtain a JD, this is the total cost across all of the full length of the program, whether it's a full or part-time program, including all mandatory fees. As you know, the average cost at an ABA school is up over in 6 figures at this point. Average for the CALS, approximately $75,000 for the degree. Average for the unaccredited, approximately $33,000 for the full degree. Next slide. Here's just a breakdown. There is a fair amount of diversity in the cost to obtain the JD across both the unaccredited and accredited portfolio. General trend holds true, but you can see the actual cost per school here. Next slide. We also have been expanding the ways that we've been looking at attrition over time. So here, this is looking at first-year law student non-transfer attrition by ethnicity and also gender identity. This is the first time that we've presented this sort of data public. It'll be part of a more expanded report that will be issued later this year. So we think it's helpful to be able to see what the attrition is by the various groups. And we think that this is the perfect time to introduce this too, especially as the accredited schools, they approach the time when they will be required to have mandatory written diversity plans effective with January of next year. Be aware of sample size. So for example, you see 100% attrition in the Native Hawaiian category and unaccredited, but that is probably a very small sample size, even though it is a non-zero number. Next slide. If you're looking at attrition by reason, academic and other reason, we see that other reasons were reported by students as the key reasons. We don't necessarily have a verification as to where they are going, whether they are transferring. This is completely self-reported data, but it appears that they're having other attentions that are taking them away from their study, and it would be helpful to know what those attentions could be. Next slide. Thanks. Okay, so this is looking at performance on state bar exams for both the CALS and unaccredited law schools. This is looking at the July 2022, what the average pass rate is for first-time takers, looking at CALS and unaccredited. And we see that it varies quite a bit by ethnic background, so that is helpful to see. And maybe this is a type of comparison we should be doing against overall bar passers on a regular basis. Next slide. You can see the pass rates here as well. Just keep in mind the sample size, and also keep in mind the change of category from some schools versus another. This is looking at only the first-time test takers over a trended period of time, last 10 years. We see an increase in 2020 and 2021. That's not sustained as time goes forward, but this may also be in reflection of the change in the CUT score, potentially bringing back more test takers during that time period that may have taken the exam in the past, as well as those who may have licensed through the alternative pathway that opened during that period. Next. I know there's a lot going on these slides, but this is looking at the pass rates by ethnicity. This is taken from the public data that has been posted on the State Bar's website. There was a period of time when not all of the information was posted, so that's where you see a little break in the lines in the middle. We see a general similarity of trends in the CALS data, but also a fair amount of variability. We don't have as much historical background data for the unaccredited. Next slide. Okay, here we're looking at gender identity. We only have men and women on this slide due to the small sample size of non-binary, but we certainly do intend to track non-binary performance going forward, especially as sample size grows. We see men generally performing slightly better than women on the bar exam at both CALS and unaccredited for most of the years, but not all. Next slide. Looking at the total JDs awarded, contribution to the profession. Last year, we saw 530 JDs graduate from the CALS as a portfolio, and 72 JDs graduate from unaccredited as a portfolio. Next slide. How were those JDs awarded? You can see a little bit of the breakdown here. Notice for the unaccredited schools, the decline to state is rather large at 26%. So that may affect how the other categories are splayed, but much lower, 10% for the CALS. So that should give a much better idea of, or much more clear idea of the degrees that are being awarded. And so one thing to notice with the CALS profile is that while the entering class is very diverse, in terms of actually reaching the JD, the largest group being awarded JD degrees at the CALS would be the white group, followed by the Latino group. And similarly, it appears that that holds true in the unaccredited as well, but it's harder to say that for sure with a 26% at decline to state unknown. When we look at gender identity, men versus women, the majority of CALS graduates receiving the JD are women versus unaccredited graduates, men. Next slide. Looking at employment outcomes, this is taken from the 6061 web report. All schools are required to place this on their accreditation page. They're asked to do a survey of those who graduated 3 years ago and to ask over the last 3 years whether those students, now graduates, were employed in an area where a JD is an advantage, a JD is required, or not in either of those categories. And you can see the breakdown as to that. The collection varies by school. Some are very successful in being able to track alumni performance, some less so, but the form does require the schools, and the schools freely report how many individuals were responding to the survey. Next slide. So if we look at the overall profile of all attorneys in California, 2023 active licensees, it might be interesting to see those that came from the various school types. So the largest contribution to the profession right now, Cal ABA approved, whether in-state and then also out of state. And then you can also see the CALS unaccredited, and other unknown is generally those that have been educated outside of the US. Okay, next slide. Here's a little bit of a breakdown by the demographic categories. You can see the contribution of active licensees in the total population. It's nice to have that comparison versus the prior slides. Next slide, please. And let's go back to the first PowerPoint, that very last slide. And while Teresa's getting that open, I know this is some information you've seen before. When you're looking at this, are there key takeaways that you first notice, or do you have suggestions about things that you think the state bar should be looking at and also should be sharing with the public to understand the contribution of the CALS and unaccredited schools? These buckets are by no means meant to restrict in any way, just more to give some idea and thought. Thank you. Okay, Dean Park.
Hello. I think rather than suggesting more in terms of data, I think there's more things around process. Perhaps I would suggest. For example, I think it's pretty amazing what has been compiled, and I can see it's very detailed, and I can see, like, you know, the footnotes going across, and especially having worked on the annual reports, in many cases, those footnotes are just fully justified. There are certain time frames or certain formulas for the data that are quite detailed in the annual report. So I could absolutely imagine that being a footnote. But I think in terms of process, especially for, you know, useful commentary on it, just perhaps a way that this can be available for viewing. There's just that difference of even, I think, seeing things at a certain size or being able to see the fine print that could definitely help to inform the feedback then one can give. And that was just one that I had as we were going through. It was great to see it compiled. I think it's very historic to see them compiled for the categories, but just ways to process the information or to give the information or deliver the information that feedback can be generated, more useful feedback can be generated. So that was one point. The other point I had has to do more with context, and I wouldn't say I have an affirmative stance yet about, which direction it would have affected the data. I think this is more something I want to note. But when I was just thinking about, the last 5 years, right, as a certain time cycle, and that's usually the time frame for accreditation or registration. I know we're wanting to perhaps think about adjustments to reports, even based on looking at this 5-year period. But I did want to note just this is a 5-year period that included a lot of unprecedented events, such as COVID. And I wrote a little list as we were going through it, and I'm sure everyone knows, but just sometimes it's good to sum it up. But, online administration of bar exams came in this 5-year period. The cut score was mentioned. Besides the cut score, though, with online modality for a bar exam, there are certainly IT issues I talked with my students about, and it's neither here or there sometimes in terms of what occurred or where blame was. But these were certainly new issues in this 5-year period for them and for the state bar. So I just think, and then there was also switching of schools with certain populations, from the CALs to the unaccredited or back. And then there's sample size. So while there's a number of unaccredited schools, and I am speaking as a registered law school dean here, there's a number of those schools, but some of the sizes of those schools are quite small. So it's great to see it compiled, but it is a number that's greatly affected by perhaps even the changes of things in 2021 or 2020 or 2022, right? Like in terms of what occurred each year. And then lastly, there's provisional licensure for a period in this time. So I just wanted to note all that context, just note how much that has gotten done that's unprecedented. And I hope that can be weighed in. Usually when we're going back and looking at data, and especially it's a 5-year, you kind of hope it's really apples to apples each of those 5 years. And of course, that might be too ideal to ask for. But I feel like there is a case for this, that it's very hard to say it was apples to apples, even between, 2018 and 2023. So those were just my thoughts that I had sort of in reaction. And it's not as much going into the data or being able to reflect on the data. I do apologize for that, but that might be more possible if there's a chance to sort of see the real size of the paper or the PDF file and see those numbers. But thank you for the time. Yes.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. So I'm hearing not only access and ability to be able to read numbers, including those that are small, but also making clear the context and some of the various events, many events that happened over the last 5 years. Great. And are there any other comments? If not, I'll turn to here and put out some thought starters. When we're thinking about possible categories in the future, in preparation for this meeting, staff reviewed the WASC and also HLC and also ABA indicators. In the area of finances, most of those schools have access to Title IV funds. Many of the CALs and a few of the unaccredited schools do as well. So unsurprisingly, there were many, many more financial indicators, overall health of the school, overall cost per JD, ability to pay back loans, things like that. Are these the sorts of things that you think would be appropriate for us to begin to track here in California as well, especially as accredited and to some extent unaccredited schools have more access to Title IV funds than in the past? Dean Keller.
Yeah, I mean, I have given this all of 3 seconds thought, but even though registered and accredited California schools have more access to Title IV, it seems like there's still significant disparities. And I think looking at financial indicators from schools that do have access and that don't have access might get misleading or confusing, or at least difficult to try to actually draw any real comparison. So I think that would be an issue, and then also just the size of the schools, and whether you are online, in person, both. Obviously, that also has an impact in terms of what your operating expenses are, etc. So it seems like comparisons within, say, the ABA, where I believe every one of them has access to and does use extensively Title IV funding, as opposed to the mix that we have as California schools. That would give me some pause, at least at first glance.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. That's a very good point. I'm interested to know, for those schools that do not have a Title IV program right now, are there certain types of measures that you are using in-house in terms of the debt load that students are taking on, or whether they're using private loans or other methods? What are you using at this time? And I don't know if Dean Leal might have anything to share regarding how things might be tracked at Irvine.
Well, just to clarify your question, Natalie, you're relating to my students' accessibility to student loans?
Oh, no, I believe that because you don't participate in the Title IV program, it would be helpful to know what are the ways that you think about or track any financial indicators for the school or for the students.
Well, we make sure they pay their tuition, so we can track that closely. Not really, that's, both a selling point and an issue for our students, that they self-finance their education. It's certainly to their benefit that virtually all graduate with little or no debt. And, they told me individually that that's one reason they were, interested in our program and stayed with our program. So we don't, because if they are borrowing money from family, friends, private loans, or from financial institutions, we've never made that inquiry. So we really don't track it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Great, thank you. Another category is just looking at progression toward graduation, and of course graduation. But before we get there, I see a hand from Della, please.
Thank you. I'm curious about, that was actually very helpful that a lot of the students appear to not graduate with a lot of debt, but thinking about it from a student's perspective, I do think it would be important to understand, if I'm going to take on this burden of self-financing or finding the resources, whether it's through private loans or otherwise, what is my ability, what is the likelihood of my ability to be able to pay that back if I get a degree from here, right? So I think that would be important consumer information for them to have, that it looks like our students are able or not able to earn enough with this degree in order to pay back the debt.
Mm-hmm.
And are they all, I'm sorry, Dean Law, are all of the schools able to say that their students graduate with very little debt, or is it just that they graduate with little debt, or debt that you just don't know about?
Well, I think the cases we honestly don't know about it. I mean, they haven't, it's seldom, well, let me speak in the real world. It happens with students who enroll or admitted to enroll, and they find out that they can't afford the program, even though our program is considerably cheaper, generally half of what a degree might cost them. And they will end up, that's part of our attrition rate, they will end up withdrawing or not enrolling because they frankly just can't afford it. I think the perspective to take to honestly look at this accurately in the real world is that our students are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and even their 60s. These are often we have a student who's a PhD, who speaks 3 languages, who's passed the federal patent bar. I'm confident she's able to manage her finances and decide whether she can afford the tuition she pays us. So I think it would be needlessly intrusive to find out if students are first personally aware of their ability to make their monthly payments along with their mortgage and their car payments. It's not something I think we've ever taken any time or effort. And I think our students would find it somewhat intrusive. So, from an educational perspective, I think they're particularly well versed in their personal finances to know whether they can afford law school. Those who can do, and they graduate without debt. Those who can't either don't enroll once admitted, or they may drop out due to a family emergency or whatever, and now they can't afford the tuition.
And Dean Leal, for context, would it be correct that the school tuition for the full JD it's a little bit over $38,000, and that's a 4-year program, so it's slightly under $10,000 per year. Is that correct?
Yeah, we actually, it's almost precisely 40,000 now. We raised our tuition a bit when we went through the transformation to become distance learning, and so yeah, it's almost exactly 10,000 a year, 5,000 a semester. We don't charge interest. We spread those payments out. We have 6-month semesters, so virtually some students have the ability and they pay their tuition up front at the start of the semester. The majority take what we offer, which is a structured payment, 6-month, a 6-payment program through the semester without interest. And, we've worked with students who, for whatever reason, fall behind. We've even, of course, allowed graduates to graduate who owe us tuition, and they continue to pay and have paid off their tuition. So we work with students individually and try to see that they succeed and both graduate, earn their degree, hopefully pass the bar, and then pay their tuition and not allow the tuition itself to be an impediment to their future success.
Thank you. Next, Dean Travis.
Yes, our experience is we've very recently been able to access Title IV funds due to HLC accreditation. And prior to this fall start, which is just 3 weeks old, we spent a lot of time and energy as a staff tracking our students who were requesting leaves of absence, whether or not that was due to financial circumstances. And then our business office would come in and try to work with those students in terms of accessing other private sources of funding. Though for the, and we always track, of course, attrition. And I know, just as an anecdotal matter, that some of our attrition, even though we have fairly modest tuition, was due to financial reasons. So we're curious to see if it's going to have an impact on attrition. But what we're seeing immediately is that the number of applicants for admissions greatly increased. I think it tripled for this particular start compared to prior starts when we didn't have the availability of financial aid. And so far, knock on wood too, everyone who we accepted started our orientation, and now their first class has remained in the school. And I attribute at least part of that to the availability of financial aid. So I think long term, hopefully, we can eliminate that factor somewhat in terms of looking at attrition and just the general comings and goings of students in our program who have to take breaks and leaves of absence because they're fallen behind on tuition and they want to catch up, or they've had a financial change in their family. So, our hope is it'll be a more stabilizing force in terms of getting students through the 4 years and without interruption.
Thank you, Dean Travis. And I'm going to skip down to that 4th box, placement, because there is some relationship between the finance and the placement. So we've been looking at the 3-year trailing, and it's been a challenge for some schools, and other schools have had more success in keeping in touch with graduates. If you feel like you've had a good experience and good survey response at your school, it would be helpful to know what has cultivated that strong alumni return of information for the surveys to be able to help others. And do you think it would be helpful to have additional detail as well? I understand that if you can't find them, you can't collect the data. So knowing what has worked to build that alumni communication, I think would be a great idea. And so maybe we could just start by knowing when and how you survey the alums, and do you do it each year, or are you waiting 3 years out? And let's start with Dean Park.
Hi, so just to speak on this, we have to pull data for our alumni for several different reports. And so we try to tell them about that, although that is one of the things I actually would want to improve on, how much we can give them a heads up even before they are out of program, that this is the kind of information that'll be important that we report on our public disclosures. In the last 3 years, it's been very challenging because that's been a post-COVID time period. But when we have people who are working with them for their academic or bar exam success, they often will want to come back to those events. They'll want to share how they're doing. And even as part of sort of sharing, the ups and downs of factors that either help them towards passing the bar or challenge them from passing the bar, you end up finding a lot about what's going on with them, including how they're doing financially, because that's a part of paying for your bar exam preparation or for the bar exam registration itself. So I think we've really found and we only offer at this time a limited amount. We have a voluntary writing workshop that we provide twice a year to our alumni and recent grads. But we have found even doing that, we get a lot of responsiveness and interest from alumni to tell them how are they doing, right? As they're considering kind of taking advantage of those resources or not from us. We've also recently had a graduation or a commencement ceremony, and we had 53 graduates there. Not all of them were JD program, but it was a very exciting event at the Glendale Hilton Ballroom. I think about 300 people attended because the communities of these law school graduates are much bigger than the law school graduate count itself. And I think if there are events like that, again, they just serve as check-in points for people to say, this is how I'm doing, or for staff to say, you know what, you're in a class where there's going to be surveys going out to you. Can you please return it? So those are the things we have worked out so far. I wouldn't call them ideal. I think we all actually want to improve more upon them. But we definitely found some things that have been helpful and generated goodwill for people to respond back.
Thanks, Dean Park. And also, just as a simple practical matter, something we think about at the state bar is, especially as students become graduates, we encourage them to choose an email for their applicant portal that will be somewhat of an evergreen email, because their school email may change or may dissolve. They may go from one employer to another, perhaps an internship to a permanent situation, and they may not remember to update that email. And so when you're reaching out to them later, it may not be valid, versus an evergreen one will stay true through all of those. And would encourage you, and we also try to encourage students to give us an evergreen email in that way. Any other successes or metrics or indicators that other schools are tracking in the area of placement, or you think it's something that State Bar should consider? Okay. And then thinking about progression toward graduation, all of the schools are beginning to share more information about attrition, more information about progression, and more information about JDs awarded. I'm wondering, as groups are experimenting, many schools were either chose or were required to select alternate modalities during COVID. Afterward, a number of the schools decided to keep those, others returned back. Have you begun to look at performance by modality, or how did that play into your ultimate choice? If the State Bar were to start to look at that a little bit more, how is it that you view it inside at your school, comparing the different structures for those that have different structures or transition from one to another? Or maybe even, for example, in the case of Thomas Jefferson, having two parallel structures.
Yeah, so since we just started our online JD this semester, we haven't been able to track anything yet. But yes, it's definitely something on our mind in terms of as we track folks through graduation, to try to look at that. I think maybe complicated by the fact that because we have both residential and online, if someone's circumstances change and they decide they want to switch to the other modality, we will allow that. Since the programs are in parallel, it won't cause any issues in terms of being able to get all of the required classes and recommended training. So I think that'll is definitely something that we are thinking about in terms of how to track that both separately and overall going forward.
Thanks, Dean Keller. And Dean Leal?
Yeah, the interesting thing we've seen, and we've been online with Zoom since the start of the pandemic, but now that our distance learning curriculum is in full swing and has been for over a year, what has been very gratifying to me as a legal educator is that the technology has really increased and enhanced the cohesion of the classes. We acquired a Zoom account and started using Zoom to try to foster study groups even before the pandemic, and there was some success there. But now that everybody's online in class, the amount of time I think our students spend working together, studying together, and they really have developed great support systems, particularly as they work their way through getting ready for the first year exam and then later on the bar exam. That modality, that ability to connect. Being an evening law school here, we were on campus in LA County for years, and people drove amazing distances to come to class, and then there was very little time or effort or interest, to get together in person, and they didn't have the access to a Zoom room as they do now. So one of the things I think is helping our students succeed is what they've done for themselves, which is to develop friendships and study groups, and the moral and even intellectual support that they're giving each other is really great to see. So that's, I think, a huge benefit that I honestly didn't appreciate before we made this transition. So that's, I also think that the online support that's now available that my school and many other schools offer, is playing a meaningful role in keeping students enrolled and having them frankly study more effectively and do better in classes. So I think we'll see lower attrition rates, particularly for folks after they get over the first year challenge, because of what we now offer and what was available in other programs as well. So I've become quite the advocate of distance learning education, so compared to what my opinions were many years ago. So I think I've seen very clear evidence of the benefits, particularly given the cohort, the students who are, the working adults, folks that are entrepreneurs, business people, law enforcement and the like, that are able to succeed where they wouldn't have succeeded but for the access to an online program.
Thanks, Dean Leal. Della Justice?
Thank you. I think in terms of whether it would be useful, I think I understand the question, Natalie, right? To be going forward, would it be helpful to track how students perform, whether they were attending school online versus in person, whether they were full-time versus part-time, right? That would be I think that information could be really helpful and really revealing, and may help a student make some decisions, right? Like if it looks like, hey, maybe students who attend part-time aren't having as much success. I'm just making this up, right? Just as an example, maybe I need to be able to commit the resources to be able to attend full-time. It also might provide some useful information about where schools might want to go moving forward, right? If they're able to look at the data and see where students are performing really well versus where they're maybe not doing as well. So being able to parse the data could be helpful, I think, not only to students, but also to the schools to just know how they're doing. I'll pause there to let other people speak, but I didn't know we were leaving placement. So I do have a couple of questions about placement, but I'll pause now and let everyone else chime in on this.
Okay, and thinking about modality, a little context that might be helpful is that historically, accredited schools have taught both full-time and part-time programs, unaccredited only part-time. And each of those groups previously had to select only one principal modality. So another new element here is actually a flexible hybrid modality, and some schools have flexible programs which really haven't been seen before. They were piloted in the CALS and accredited programs, and we see that the ABA programs will be beginning to offer those. So that's something where there just hasn't been the data. We haven't seen that, but it looks like something we'll be seeing more in the future. Any other thoughts about performance by modality or by full or part-time status? Okay, why don't we return to placement?
Thank you. I had a few questions on the placement because it was related. I thought you were transitioning there from financial indicators. When students report their placement information, does it include any information regarding their salary?
Not at this time. That's not a question the steeper has asked. So far, it's been solely whether they are in a JD Advantage or a JD Required program or not. So adding salary might be a new type of measure that we would think about, and we might want to control in this area for whether, understand whether they changed jobs or not. Because some folks in this population, for example, might be a peace officer wanting the JD to be able to advance within the department, not necessarily moving from their employer, versus another person would make a switch to the practice of law.
Right. Good. I hear you hearing that. That sounds helpful on that. Is there a survey done when students start about what their intention is with the JD degree, whether it is just they want it, they're not intending to take the bar exam, they're not intending to practice law, they're just looking to get sort of, as you say, the advance in their career because having a JD would do that? Is that known by schools at the beginning, or is that something that is never found out specifically?
It might be helpful to ask our members if they formally ask their students. Our NPR and cumulative bar pass rates only include those who take the bar and exclude those that never decide to. But is it a formal question that you ask of your student body at any time? And if so, at what point in the process might you ask them? I'm seeing Dean Travis. Well, actually, let's go in order, then Dean Park and then Dean Keller.
Yes, that is part of the standard interview we do at admissions. So we're asking, first of all, why they want to get a JD. And our student body and applicant pool tends to, of course, skew older. And historically, our school really marketed to adults, successful professionals who did not necessarily want to get a license, but they wanted the legal education. Our population has switched more towards the students who do intend to take the bar exam. And we have several questions that we ask in admissions along with that. For example, can you type? And what's your approximate typing speed? and introducing the idea that if you do intend to take the bar exam, that all of the assessments are done currently by, or at least the writing portion, by typing. So we really do track that, and we've had, in our experience, some group of students who started off through admissions saying, I don't want to take the bar, that I want this degree to assist me in my current career, make me eligible for promotion, or now I don't have to pay attorneys to do all this money when I can perform these legal tasks myself. But we are finding that a very high percentage of our students, looking at the ones that represented initially, we don't necessarily want to take the bar exam. Once they get through 4 years, they take it. We have a very small group that sticks with their initial rationale for going to law school if it includes not taking the bar. And they just almost all end up taking it.
Thanks, Dean Travis. How about Dean Park, please?
So a large part of the law school admissions is asking the student about what they want with the JD program. They tie that into a personal statement, a resume. They take different assessment steps during admissions. And so even before there is a review of the student, the admissions staff is working with the student to make sure what program is best for them. If we have a student that's just looking for enrichment, but they don't want a bar eligible program, there are other options that are discussed with them at our university. But we find that a lot of the students that come in, they like the challenge of going for a bar eligible program, and they want to do things with that in the future. And we tell them with that, it means 4 years of continuous study for 52 weeks. You won't get something like a summer break or a winter break. That's how it is at the registered law school category for distance learning. And so there is a strong assessment even before they get to tuition or other considerations. Is this really for you? That being said, for example, we don't stop people who are at a certain age or at a certain point in their career from applying into the JD program. And when you think about the variety there, we've had an LAUSD supervisor who's retired. We've had, I believe, in the Port of Oakland, HR manager who is very specialized in working on labor disputes and engagements in his area. They all have different reasons for wanting to aspire for the bar eligible program at whatever age they choose to do so. So we look for that in the application stage. But if you see someone who wants a lot more freedom in how they're studying for the law, we definitely talk to them about other options, because if they don't know it will take 4 years of continuous study, 52 weeks each to do it, then it's not a service for them to continue in the admissions process for JD. And that's how it is at ALU. I'm sure other law schools can speak. With that, happy to pass the mic to Linda Keller.
Thanks, Dean Park. So yeah, echo some of what's been said in terms of this is definitely part of the conversation at the admission stage. We do not currently, rigorously track students' intentions from day one because of our prior experience where that can change, and sometimes it's people who are in a position and say, oh, but I really want to be a lawyer, and then get their degree and decide, actually, I don't think I want to practice law, but having this JD is going to help me still advance, in my current career. More often, what we see is people coming in and saying, oh, I'm not going to sit for the bar. that's not my particular ambition. I just want the JD for whatever reasons that might be. But often when after you've put in the work and you're surrounded by all these other people who are studying for the bar, we found lots of people who then say, well, I might as well just try it and see what happens. And that rarely goes well, given how much study needs to be put in for the bar exam post-grad, no matter how much your curriculum is aimed at bar prep. So we certainly have a sense of a fair number of people coming in with that viewpoint, but we don't rigorously track it, in part because we would need to revisit it constantly and then try to get them to really reflect on where they are at various points and their reasons for taking the bar exam if they're switching it up at the last minute.
Okay. Dean Leal?
Yeah, I just don't want to repeat what everyone else has said. I agree with everything that has been said. I would say that our program is marketed and as a pathway to the profession. We are as upfront and as direct to our prospective applicants, our actual applicants, those who enroll. This is, we're here for one reason. We are working to work with you in a partnership to give you the opportunity to, one, receive a quality legal education, and then develop the skills you will need to pass the first year exam and then the bar exam. And that's why the folks that enroll in my program or our program, are there. And it's, in my 5 years as dean, I can think of only maybe 2 students who changed their mind and graduated and then never took the bar exam. And to be frank, I never followed up, but they just haven't. So that's their intent going in by far, and it's the intent throughout their entire tenure at the program. So
Thank you. I appreciate the perspective. We have just a couple of minutes. Dean Keller, Susan Bakshian is here to talk about the portfolio bar exam, but are there any concluding remarks you'd like to make about the law school performance report?
It looked like Dean Park perhaps had another comment there.
I'm so sorry. I forgot to say perhaps an important thing. We do have surveys, not at the applicant level, but given to students during the JD program each year, and then to alumni each year. So I forgot to say, but that would be another place where we actually have questions to tell them. What were you aspiring for? Did that get fulfilled so far in your program, like at the point that you're at? And then of course for alumni, because we ask those questions of, are you in a job position where the JD degree is optional or required? It naturally is asked of them, like, is this program fulfilling what you expected when you started it? So I forgot to say that that would be responsive to what the topic was as well. So
thanks, Dean Park. And thanks, Dean Keller, for noticing.
Sure. So yeah, I think this would be a good time to transition to the discussion on the proposal for the portfolio bar exam. Certainly appreciate our guest joining us to be able to share her expertise.
Okay, great. So Teresa, I'm going to ask you to promote, you already are, Susan Bakshian, one of the members of the group that put together the portfolio bar exam proposal that was requested by the Board of Trustees. That proposal is currently posted for public comment through the 25th of October. And you can place that public comment on the public comment page. So as a matter of background, I want to make sure that any public comment from members of the CS bars or also members of those attending should be sent through the public comment page. But we've invited Susan here today to talk about the proposal so that you have a chance to ask questions, so that any future public comment that you might share by the October 25th deadline can be based on your specific knowledge and experience and thoughts related to that proposal. We know that it is large, approximately 40 pages, lots of information, and she can help to summarize and answer some of the specific questions you may have. So with that, I would like to welcome Susan Bakshan.
Hi, Natalie. Can you hear me?
We can, and if you want to, you're free to turn your camera on.
I do not appear to have been promoted.
Ah,
I don't mind if you can't see me, but it is a little strange for everyone in the meeting not to be able to see who is speaking. There we go. There we go.
Thank you.
That might be a little less odd. Thank you for inviting me today. I'm Susan Bakshan from Loyola Law School, and I'm one of the members of the working group that has presented the proposal for the portfolio bar exam. I am going to assume that most of you know something about it, but maybe not everything that is in the 40-page report plus additional pages of appendix. There is a 2-page fact summary that is available, and if you're interested in that, I can share it, which does sort of give you some quick talking points on the portfolio bar exam, boiled down to 2 pages. And I'm happy to share that with you, but I'd like to just give you a couple of quick highlights and then take any questions that you have. The portfolio bar exam is just that. It is an option to the traditional exam. The framework would be supervised practice with assessment of a portfolio. It has several important advantages and several important key impacts. The first and foremost is it protects the public well. Because what this does is actually assess that the folks who are licensed to be lawyers in California are actually capable of demonstrating the knowledge and skills that are necessary. They've not passed an exam that is proxy for those things. They have actually demonstrated those things. One of the advantages is that it creates a pathway for applicants who need to work immediately. So immediately after graduation, applicants would be able to work under supervision and would be able to start creating that portfolio for assessment and completing their supervised hours. The cost savings to applicants would be substantial because obviously this does forego the unpaid study time and the cost of bar review. And the public impact is particularly important in underserved communities and potentially for legal services organizations. There are many benefits, but the one I'd like to sort of highlight for you first is that the portfolio bar exam is based on universal design. This does reduce the need for applicants to request accommodations because there is not a traditional exam component. So with the portfolio exam, instead of a traditional exam, we do not have exam accommodations. So this levels the playing field substantially, particularly for those without economic resources to procure the kinds of testing that accommodations often requires. And of course, there are no bar review expenses. It also provides access to an exam option. It is not a replacement for the traditional exam. It is designed to be an option for those who want to pursue it, and those who prefer the traditional exam would be free to remain to do so. So there are many more details in the report itself, but the portfolio bar exam, it does have various protections and recommendations built into it. There are public and applicant protections in terms of applicants will be required to be compensated. This will not be free supervised work. So we have suggested supervisor training requirements, supervisor replacement options. If someone has a dispute or problem with their supervisor, they should be able to replace them and continue to create their portfolio. The final portfolio evaluation is not by the supervisor, not by the law school. It will be by independent examiners, much the way the bar exam is graded. It will be there are protections to ensure that this is independent work product, that it is actually the work of the applicant. And we have also put in suggestions to make sure, of course, that all confidential client information will be scrubbed from the submissions before they go for evaluation. There's also lots of design protections. The working group met all summer with a variety of psychometric experts, and we have made sure that the portfolio bar exam can proceed in a way that will be fair and valid and reliable. And we have also made some suggestions for how rubrics could be created to evaluate the portfolio, as well as we have made some suggestions as for scaling options. And perhaps it's worth a couple of quick notes about the scaling option. The portfolio bar exam is suggested to begin with we have suggested a pilot of the approximately 100 or so applicants that remain in the provisional licensing program. The provisional licensing program that started during COVID has been a tremendous success in California, and the portfolio bar examination builds upon that. And what we would like to do is suggest a pilot with those remaining people, that they be provided the portfolio bar exam option, and that pilot can then be used to create all of the kind of data and assessment and evaluation that would be appropriate to determine if and how to properly scale the portfolio bar examination. So that is where we are today. And one of the things that we are suggesting is simply that the portfolio bar examination be sent forward to the Supreme Court. We are hoping that the Board of Trustees will do that in November, and that the California Supreme Court will decide to allow a pilot program and hopefully establish a new committee to further work on the portfolio bar examination. There is a 40-page full report with lots of details. This is not just an idea. This is the first presentation of a portfolio or alternative type of exam as a supplement to the traditional exam. And again, the framework is a relatively simple one. It is supervised practice coupled with a portfolio assessment. And it basically what we have is the portfolio exam is a good example of the kind of comprehensive licensing options that many states have started to look into and are either currently considering or currently adopting. And I believe that there may be more since I made this list, but Georgia, Minnesota, New Hampshire, Nevada, Oregon, Utah, and Washington are all have alternative or more comprehensive choices like the portfolio bar exam, either under consideration or in the process of adoption. So this is something where California could be a leader. It is something that is the future of licensing. And it's a good example of the type of more comprehensive assessment that jurisdictions are adopting and considering as we speak. So with that, I will stop and let you ask any questions you may have about the portfolio bar examination and the alternative that we are presenting to the Board of Trustees and hopefully eventually to the California Supreme Court.
I see a question from Dean Keller.
Yep, thanks. So thank you so much for that summary. That was very helpful. I have looked at the materials, but I wonder if you could just speak to what seems to be a misguided assumption or fear with regard to who would end up being able to participate successfully in the portfolio bar exam pathway. Specifically, I've heard concerns that, the only people who will be able to participate are the really privileged people who already know, 1,000 attorneys and they'll get positioned and no one else will. That seems to fly in the face of what we saw with some other experiences. But so could you elaborate on that?
Yes. The irony of that critique is that it is likely just the opposite is true. The provisional licensing program shows us that the most common use of the provisional licensing, which was a form of supervised practice, it is different than the portfolio bar examination, but the original PLL program was most highly used by women and people of color. And the lowest rate of participation in that group was white males. So the idea that somehow creation of an option creates only a second-class type of option really misses the data that we have out there on the provisional licensing program. And I think it also misses the data of simply the ability in law to, as all of you know by teaching at Cal schools, I'm at an ABA school now, but my career was not always at an ABA school. And I I know that these are schools of real opportunity, and they are schools that take advantage of the growth that can come from being a JD, the growth of being a first generation college grad or attorney or all of those things. And I think that the portfolio bar examination simply provides an opportunity to further that mission. And to say, if studying for 10 weeks and having the money to study for 10 weeks and provide and pay for an expensive bar review course, that is a thing of privilege. Not an ability to work right away under the supervision of a lawyer. And, you know, I am not worried about lawyers being able to find supervisors, because I do believe that the law schools will step up and assist. I believe alumni will want to help other alumni. And I also think this is an opportunity for things like we have seen in legal services, in legal deserts, in rural areas, where a lawyer might not be able to take a chance on someone who may or may not successfully pass the bar, but could very much take a chance on taking on a young lawyer under supervision in one of those communities or areas, and help, and they build their portfolio. But in that meantime, provides that lawyer with more legal services in a community of great need.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Dean Park.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you again just for that great presentation. I really do remember trying to tune in to all these various meetings that were occurring around the COVID time. And I remember being very heartened to see, for example, the California Lawyers Association create even specific online forums for people in the provisional licensure program to connect with supervising attorneys. So I think it is a great thing. It's a great dynamic in the community, and it definitely, it's great to see when the community supports these students that want the option. I just had 2 questions, and I would not be above asking you for the 2-pager. So
I'm not sure I have permission to put it
with some patience, but you know, just speaking a little bit from the devil's advocate side, or in the sense of some things I heard just across the years, mostly I think representing fears rather than necessarily coming out of an experience. But you know, I certainly heard the question of, oh, how can we make sure these graders are independent? And when I was looking through the file, you know, I could see it all across there, you know, independent graders assigned by the state bar, and independence a very important word basically for them. But from your perspective, what would that mean, or how much is left to be fleshed out about that with, you know, the potential 100-person pilot? I was just curious about that.
Yeah, I agree. Independent grader is important. And I think the first sort of primary underpinning of independent is it's not the supervisor. We don't want the supervisor to have the ultimate authority to say whether or not someone is licensed. That's not an appropriate protection for the public, and that's not how licensure works. So we would, in fact, rely on a model much more like the independent graders that the California State Bar uses today. And they are a diverse group of people from a diverse group of practice areas. And they're an excellent representation of the lawyers in the state of California. And I would hope that we would be able to develop a similar grading base of graders, much like we use graders for the bar exam today. Now, to that point, we are at the stage of suggesting a pilot. So of course, all of the details are going to be worked out. And one of the things that we would love to see in public comment is ideas. If somebody says, you know, there's a great idea to make sure that the supervisors are more independent, consider this. I think that the next committee that moves this forward, that's exactly what they need, is they need that kind of help. And they need to say, here's some additional ideas, because what we have drawn as the working group is a framework. And what we have drawn is a framework that can be adopted and is ready to be piloted. But it is not every fine detail mapped out yet. That's what the pilot is for, is to test the concept and then to develop those. But I have no doubt that as long as it is not limited to the supervisor being the final authority, which would not be independent, that we've done a great deal of protection just by that.
Oh, thank you for that. And it sounds like, for example, then ideas about calibration and all that, that's part of the pilot fleshing out.
Yes, the pilot would flesh out calibration and rubrics. Though Oregon, if you're interested in seeing some details, a lot of people are like, I would like to see some details about what it might look like. And of course, that's because we're all lawyers. And of course, we like to see the documents. And if you would like to see the documents, there are some Oregon documents in that they are a little further along in the process than we are. Their Supreme Court is actually considering adoption as we speak. And so Oregon is a jurisdiction that's already started the rubric creation process and is a little farther down the path. They have created some very detailed rules and procedures, which are quite excellent if you want an idea of the kind of thing that it could be crafted to look like.
Great, thank you. And I did have a second question, but I just want to make sure I'm not hogging the space. My second question, again, just kind of spirit of devil's advocate. I know that you reviewed multiple jurisdictions and you mentioned the progress of some of them. For any of the jurisdictions that sort of did their experiment, stopped and stepped back, were there any sort of useful takeaways from that in terms of reasons they may have paused or sort of modified what they were doing in their experimenting?
I'm not sure I would characterize any jurisdiction that we reviewed as having started something like this and then paused it. I would characterize jurisdictions as having had some struggles during COVID and starting and stopping some changes. And I would call it more of transitions than pauses. That I think an awful lot of jurisdictions, COVID was in some ways an opportunity to see licensure can be better, and that licensure can be improved, and that licensure doesn't have to look only like it has looked in the past. And so that I think is, I do think you've seen jurisdictions try some things and change some things. And I do think that the lessons from all of these are the big picture lesson that a 2-day traditional exam holds no high ground as the best way to license attorneys. And I recently heard somebody refer to the portfolio bar exam a little bit as that, and a good analogy is a driver's license, that a lot of licensure works this way. When you first get your license, somebody else is with you for a short time, and that would be our supervised hours. And that you have to pass both an examination in driving around, much like the portfolio. And so basically what we have here is an opportunity to recognize that this is direct licensure. This is direct demonstration of the skills and knowledge needed to be an attorney, not proxy of a 2-day exam that may or may not demonstrate those skills and knowledge very well.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. You're answering my questions.
Thank you.
Dean Marshall.
Suzanne, thank you for this information. When you use the term pilot, I'm curious, what will be the criteria to be able to participate in the pilot? Will it be limited by number, time? I think you get my drift.
I think at this point, the details are actually in the report, and there are several pages about the pilot and scaling and how it might operate. So I would ask you to take a look at that detail. But to give you the quick overall answer, I believe that the pilot will be anybody who's currently in, at least our suggestion is anyone who's currently in the provisional licensing program and has not yet passed the California bar exam. I believe it's between 100 and 125 people who are working right now as attorneys. And so they would be the first pilot group, and then there would be expansion. At least that's how we envision the future. Of course, this is all subject to adoption by the Board of Trustees and the California Supreme Court. They could make any requirements they wanted, although the program, the provisional licensing lawyer program is set to expire at the end of 2025. So there is some urgency with getting a pilot started because of that.
And Susan, would you like us to put the 2-page on the screen? I know
That would be great. I was going to say to
mentioned.
Natalie, I'm not sure if I have Zoom powers to put anything in the chat, but if Natalie can put the 2-page fact sheet there. The convenience of the 2-page fact sheet is, first of all, it's 2 pages, not 40. But more importantly, it also has the public comment link at the bottom. So if you have decided you would like to add something in public comment, at the very end of the 2-page document is a link to where public comment is open until October 25th. And we very much would love to have public comment designed. Of course, we would like support for the option, but we would also really like to see ideas about how we address piloting, how we address scaling, how we address rubric creation. And the psychometricians have made it very clear we can do this in a way that is fair, valid, and reliable, but we also want to do it in a way that is practical and cost effective.
And maybe we could spend a little time on the first page, Teresa, so that folks watching from the audience will be able to see that. So this is a summary created. Is this created by you, Susan?
The 2-page fact sheet is created by the working group. Yes, it's the equivalent of an executive summary of the report.
Okay, great. And that public comment link that's at the bottom, members can also access that public comment link by going to the State Bar's website and even just typing public comment in the search box. It'll show you the full 40-page proposal, a brief summary, as well as the link to submit your public comment as well.
Yes, there's a very helpful summary on the public comment page. So if you go to that link and start there, that's a good place to get an overall summary.
Thanks. And it looks like we have a comment from Dean Leal.
Really more my deepest personal thanks to you and your colleagues, particularly Dean Gardina. I think collectively you have perhaps very imaginatively moved the issue of licensing in California a light year ahead of where it's been for decades. You know, I say this as a former trial attorney and litigator that practiced law for 30 years. And I think that, and I would be the first to say that a portfolio means of licensure perhaps will produce better qualified and capable licensees than the folks that are really good at answering multiple choice questions and essay questions. So this must have, I know, taken a lot of work and insight and mostly imagination, and with the help of the other jurisdictions you've mentioned. So my personal thanks. I hope it has legs and that it continues to move forward and will be adopted and become, again, we won't be the first, but among those states I think that have the foresight to provide this alternative pathway to licensure in the profession.
Thank you. I should say that Dean Gardina would have been here today, but she was at another meeting. And so I am without my usual partner in crime. So she and I are 2 members of the working group. The others are listed at the top. Judge Reesar, who's a retired Superior Court judge, Natalie Rodriguez, and Mylin Spencer. So the working group did have the benefit of a lot of expert help and a lot of psychometricians who were willing to talk to us and to make sure that we could create a proposal that would really work. We do have the benefit of the help of some other jurisdictions and experts, and that has been tremendously helpful. But really, I just can't thank you enough for being willing to listen and hear about our proposal. And thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Susan. Dean Keller, I wonder if you have any thoughts or concluding comments regarding the portfolio bar exam.
No, other than to echo the thanks, and definitely for lawyers, 40-page report is not that long. I would definitely recommend folks to check it out. But I did have a question. Certainly, I think this would be a 2-pager is always helpful to put it together. Is this available publicly anywhere? Right now, we're just looking at it on a shared screen, but if it is posted somewhere, certainly
it's
would
been
like
posted several different places in several different versions. We have presented at Access to Justice. We have presented to the California Bar Examiners. We have presented to the Coalition for Access and Fairness. And I am not going to, off memory, try to tell you exactly who posted which versions of which fact sheets or who posted the full report, but the full report, this fact sheet, and various versions of it. And an easy place, if you just want an easy place to go find this in a public forum, it is on my LinkedIn page. So you can find it there as well. But yes, it's a publicly available summary. It's been used in this form and adapted with some more specific or different details for some different groups, but a variety of different public and private organizations have seen it and do have it, and it's publicly available.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much for that. Definitely want anyone in watching this on video in particular to be able to figure out where they can go find this, or as well as the report, which is available through the public comment page, as I understand it. So I definitely encourage people to review it. In particular, there was some conversations I had with folks very early on, who, particularly practicing lawyers, who just heard alternative pathway and thought, oh, this is going to be like just letting anybody suddenly claim to be a lawyer. And I think looking at this proposal and really keeping in mind that this is a portfolio bar exam, this is not some sort of lightweight alternative to the bar exam. It's actually an alternative based on showing your competency through actually doing what you are supposed to be being a judge to be competent for, rather than the proxy of multiple choice and other questions on the current bar exam. So I definitely recommend folks to check it out and draw their own conclusions from looking at the details. So thank you so much for being here and being able to respond to questions. I think that was very helpful.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.
Okay. And that was our last item for today, which is great because we are coming up on the end of our scheduled time. So again, I want to thank everyone for being here and appreciate everyone's time. Have a great day.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.